the leader of the ractopamine. Um, it was called Payleen, and that's not a coincidence because it produces leaner meat, which means that the farmer is going to get more money. So Payleen was not, I mean, it was literal. And so when it first came out, the FDA accused Elanco, who was at that point Eli Lilly's pharmaceutical arm, with withholding adverse information that the FDA should have known. And I saw the letters from farmers. Farmers wrote in, they said, I gave the pigs the Payleen and now they're dying, they're dead, they're downers. So, I mean, it right away started out badly. Rats, in a Canadian study, and I think that maybe that's the next slide, but in a Canadian study, I was shocked to see that this ractopamine was given to rats and it produced, as you can see here, all these effects. So it's like, what are we doing? Are we giving this to our, you wonder. I mean, you just wonder. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so now here's a study of the effects on mice and human endothelial cells. So not really in people, but in people's cells. And these researchers said that they feel it's highly correlated with arteriosclerosis. And literally, I'm reading from my other slide here, deregulated cholesterol metabolization, inflammation, accelerated atherosclerosis. And, so it has strong human effects according to these researchers. And again, you wonder, with any livestock, you have to ask, are there residues from these drugs that the drugs store in our food? So next slide, please. Now, ractopamine has been a big issue in Southeast Asia, where a lot of pig farming goes on. And it produced riots in 2007 and 2016 in Taiwan, which is a big pork producing country, because I think the competition, the idea that if a ban there was an existing ban on ractopamine, and these Taiwanian farmers did not want that ban lifted because of the competition of maybe a better type of pork. And so they really had riots. This wasn't covered a lot in the West, but they actually threw dung at their government buildings. And this continues to go on. I think there was a riot in 2020. So this continues to go on. Some of you may remember this animal behavior expert, Temple Grandin, and she would work on making slaughter procedures less cruel or more humane. And she's very against ractopamine. She said that she's written that it makes pigs, it causes downers. And then if your animal is a downer, you're going to move that animal with like a front loader or something cruel. And she noted hoof failures in cows, that their hoofs would come off them. So it's a terrible drug on many, many levels, and it's widely used. Now, one more thing I'll say about ractopamine is that nobody was really aware of it until one meat product began advertising itself as ractopamine-free. And at that point, then people are like, you mean that this isn't free? And that's why labeling is so much a part of this, because so much of what I'm talking to you today about is not on the label. And ractopamine is a case in point. So anyway, this is all shocking stuff that I think probably would change people's eating habits if they knew, how the meat was produced or what they're eating or what residues are left there. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so this Seafood Secrets was an article I did for Consumer Reports, and it opened my eyes to a lot that I didn't know. I didn't want to know this, but most of our shrimp here in the U.S. is imported from countries like Thailand, Cambodia, even I think Pakistan, and it's aquaculture and it's farmed and it's very intensive. So because of the high densities, antibiotics are used even preventatively to keep disease from breaking out. And so naturally you have, well, not naturally, but banned antibiotics are used in the aquaculture. Also parasite killers and disinfectants are used. And when I was writing for Consumer Reports, they had me interviewing inspectors on the docks. These would be FDA inspectors who control what comes in at the port. And they told me, we don't open these. We don't, 96% of these shipments, we don't even open them. So we have no idea. And you see here that some of these antibiotic resistant bacteria have been found in these shrimp. You know, obviously MRSA, you don't want that in your food or anywhere. But one thing these inspectors told me when I was able to interview them was that if a country is blacklisted because they've got so many banned antibiotics or residues, they will simply what they call transship it, and they'll send it to Canada. It'll come back looking like a different company, and so it's still in the food system supply. They won't, in other words, take no for an answer. They won't go away with these shrimp. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so naturally, this effluviant from the aquaculture is also harmful to the wildlife, the environment where it's grown. Some of these aquaculture operations just simply move. They just leave like a 3-mile island. They just go to a new site. And so they're very bad for the manufacturers too of these shrimp operations. And there's a liquid called formalin, which is formaldehyde with methanol. And it's used to kill the parasites that come from this type of breeding of shrimp. The shrimp, from what I've learned and researched, are very prone to disease. They get black spot, they get white spot, they get a disease called early mortality syndrome. And so they constantly need the antibiotics and the parasites. You know, they're really a tough crop if you consider them a crop. And some operations, I think in South America, have actually been wiped out from these diseases, especially the early mortality syndrome. Another thing, naturally we would look at the wild-caught shrimp. You know, is that a humane alternative? And according to what I learned working with Consumer Reports, no, wild-caught is not preferable because they do have turtle releasing nets so that big turtles aren't caught in the bycatch, except that they're not always used. And in Louisiana, they're actually prohibited. So along with the shrimp are killed turtles, dolphins, and sharks. You know, so it's not humane. And so the wild caught is not the answer environmentally, at least according to my research when I worked with the Consumer Report. So I think there might be, now we have some slides showing some of these shrimp diseases. If you want to go, okay. Oh, before we see those, one thing that is a humane issue is in order to make the female shrimp lay more eggs more quickly, they take their eyes off. It's called eye stalk ablation. And some of us who love animals feel that that's cruel, but this particular article says that it's also ineffective because this article says by removing the eyes of the females, the offspring are less robust and that more of them die. And this particular article says that that giving the females better food and sunshine actually will also encourage the reproduction, make it quicker. So this particular article feels that that this could be stopped, the eye stalk ablation. And you know, few people know about this because, you know, it's like so many things like this are not really picked up by media, news media, because you have to keep in mind that who are their advertisers? Okay, Olive Garden, Wendy's. You're not going to hear a lot of this anti-food stuff, facts, from news media because of their advertising. Just like we don't hear about big pharma because of the drug ads. So there's almost a news embargo on some of this stuff. Next slide, please. So here we see the black spot, and you see it's really maybe not as much a health issue as just a gross issue, because they just look gross and people can't sell them. Okay, so but it's very common, the black spot. And we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so now here's the formaldehyde aqueous solution that I mentioned, and you can see it's commonly used. And how many people really want to eat something that was treated with formaldehyde? I'm just saying. Next slide. Okay, now the hormones in U.S. beef. Okay, so again, I have to pull up my other computer screen, so bear with me for a second here. Now, most people know, or maybe they don't know, okay, that zeranol, trenbolone, and melengestrol, I have trouble saying these sometimes, are routinely used in U.S. beef, okay? The European Commission on Scientific and Veterinary Measures literally in its reports links these three hormones to breast and prostate cancer. In some of their writings, they've even talked about compared cancer rates in the US versus places that don't eat these beef hormones. And they're not in organic beef, US beef, but the EU, at least up until 2015, and I couldn't find later than this, I think it's probably still the case, will take no hormone treated beef, okay? That's all the EU countries. So it kind of makes you wonder, right? Like, what do they know that we don't know? This one, I think it's our next slide, if you want to go there, Birna. Okay, so, okay, here we see that zeranol is correlated with breast cancer, human breast cancer, at least in this one study. I remember other studies that make these correlations. And we know, of course, EU has made these correlations. So that's, now the next slide I think is about fish, and the effluvium from the feedlots actually affects aquatic life. Now this is an older article. There's been many articles since then about like shrimp on Prozac, and but this particular research came from a plant, a beef facility in Nebraska. And these researchers found that both the males and the females were altered by just swimming near this feedlot because of all the hormones that were coming out of the effluvium. So it's an issue, and not just for humans and of course the animals, but it's now a marine issue, that these aquatic, the hormone usage. So, I'm always surprised as a reporter how kind of what a closed loop we are news-wise, because many Americans don't realize that much of the world won't eat hormone-treated beef or rectopamine-treated pork, and that we're eating things that a lot of the world banned. And this is kind of a case in point, and it shows why too. And now these minnows, for heaven's sakes. So then I think the next slide, if you don't mind, Bear. Okay, now, as it should be pretty apparent by now that slaughterhouses and processing places and the meat in general is really very infested with bacteria. And that's why the antibiotics have become such an issue. And it's also it drives the use of disinfectants and preservatives, because there's what are you going to do? We're always hearing about salmonella, listeria, E. coli in the meat, and well, yeah, so. And I've interviewed a lot of slaughterhouse workers, and of course it's in the meat. So what we've done here in the U.S. and what we continue to do is dip the chickens in chlorine. And again, that's become a trade issue because a lot of countries won't take chlorine dipped chicken, okay? Then you have the ammonia, and ammonia made a debut about 10 years ago in what they call pink slime, okay? And it was the first time that some of the public were really aware of how bad bacterial growth is in the meat processing. And at that point in time, they were taking the ground beef and treating it with ammonia gas, and to address E. coli specifically. And when the public found out about it, the public was kind of horrified because it was like USDA ground beef going to school lunches. And so the place that produced it had to shut down and lost a lot of its contracts. It was quite the scandal about 10 years ago. And what people don't realize is that that company who produced it, the main producer of pink slime, which was, I think, called Lean Textured Beef or whatever, it sued ABC News for defamation. And it was considered by the courts, this company, to be a person who had been defamed. Not only did this company win millions in the settlement, but pink slime was legalized by USDA, and it's now called ground beef, and it's allowed in 15% of all ground beef. So in other words, this story, we didn't win on this story. Another thing that people aren't really aware of is the carbon monoxide is what keeps meat looking red, and it can keep meat looking red for as long as 20 days. And that is called, I've got to pull up my new slide here, but that is called modified atmosphere packaging or something. Yeah, modified atmosphere packaging. The big meat people defend it, and they say that don't overreact and it's not harmful, and but what it really is a sales issue because nobody wants to buy the stuff when it's not looking fresh. So the carbon monoxide is used like routinely to keep the meat fresh, looking fresh. And then of course, most of you are aware of nitrites and nitrosamines and the cancer potential of the nitrosamines. And those are used not just in meat, but oh my gosh, they're all over the place, and I recommend that nobody should ever eat them because it's just not healthy. I mean, they don't all turn into nitrosamines, but they certainly can, and so the disinfectants and the preservatives are kind of, again, an underreported part of the food supply. Okay, so then our last slide, I think we're going to, oh, here we go, the nitrosamines. Well, yeah, they turn, it's a carcinogen. I mean, come on, so again, it's not really reported because of the advertisers, news media, it really isn't going to go there. I found that some of the 60 Minutes shows are really hard on supplements. They're not hard on corporate advertisers. I'm just saying, in my experience. So our last slide, I believe, is about the high fructose corn syrup, because I don't just pick on meat. And the high fructose corn syrup, of course, is everywhere. What I find really sad is that the Coca-Colas and PepsiCo, PepsiCo, the big soft drink makers, are really at the policy level with governments, and they're like, let's say in certain South American countries, if there's an obesity problem, here comes PepsiCo or Coca-Cola and will counsel the governments about, helping the people slim down as if they aren't a big part of it. And these soft drink makers launched a big camp. They donate to the CDC, which helps cover it, makes them look like good guys. But they also had launched a huge campaign indicting obesity, indicting lack of exercise in the obesity epidemic. So in other words, it's not them. You can have your Coke, but just, get on your treadmill. And they're sneaky, and they make a lot of money counseling these governments But what I found pretty interesting about the high fructose corn syrup was a recent article, which I think we can go to this next article, Birna. And this, I know this Dr. Wilson pretty well. And in this article, they hypothesize that the high fructose corn syrup activates a foraging instinct in humans. And so even though there's like a activistic famine response that mammals have, according to these researchers, and it helps them hibernate and get through times when there's not a lot of food. And these researchers believe that the high fructose corn syrup activates that. And so that would explain why maybe they feel like they're still hungry, but they're not still hungry. And they also conjecture that some ADHD-like behaviors are actually caused by the high fructose corn syrup, which is everywhere. And when I read this article, I'd recommend it to listeners. It really, it's disturbing because we know how ADHD has become so common versus when I grew up, it wasn't, they didn't even call it that. But, it makes you wonder because we know we're all hooked on, many of us are hooked on soft drinks, and anywhere you go, you're going to find the soft drinks. So anyway, that is pretty much what I have on the drugstore in our food, and I would love to know if anybody has questions.
So